Thank you, Ashley. So welcome, everybody. I'm looking at the list here, and I don't know that we need to do introductions today because I think everybody here has been on numerous of these meetings. So why don't we just jump right in? And I hate to do this. Brian, do we have to do this again?
Which part?
The first agenda item.
Oh,
The director.
The director question, of course.
Why do we do this again? All right,
oh,
Brian, give us the
do I
update.
have to talk again, or do we have to talk about the department leadership again?
Yes.
Yeah,
Let's-
that. Unfortunately, I'll make this quick with my little department announcement. Yes, unfortunately, we have to do this yet again, and I currently have no boss. Which kind of cuts both ways. Interestingly, I shouldn't say that. Maybe that's a little too informal. I currently have no boss and have been through 3 directors in the last 12 months. There's a lot of people. Frankly, there's a lot of people leaving the city, and there have been a lot of people that have left the Department of Civil Rights. So that puts a lot of strain on frontline staff across all the divisions. But maybe that's also true of a lot of places around the entire city and throughout the economy. So,
Brian, we kind of jumped in assuming everybody knew the news, but do you maybe want to back up?
Sorry, I kind of alluded to it. Director Jafar, former interim director of the Civil Rights Department, Imani Jafar, took a new job at Target, interestingly. Our good friend Target, or our committee member Target, and so she's no longer with the city. You all will recall that before her there was interim director Frank Reed, who did a great job, but was only a very short time in that role. And then before him was longtime Civil Rights Director Velma Corbell, and she left about 12 months ago, I want to say, off the top of my head. So that leaves a big hole in the Department of Civil Rights, especially as we go through things like budget processes, etc. So that's big news, at least for my day to day, and it's something that you should all be aware of. So I wanted to flag that for everyone. Unless anyone has it, if anyone has any questions, please interrupt me at any time. The only other things I just wanted to touch on before we get to kind of our main event for the day. I see Eric Garcia Luna on the line, and he has a presentation about some of his current work at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. So we'll get to him just momentarily. But the only other things, Ashley, if you could let us know, Ashley, kind of the state of affairs as far as applications and what open seats do we still have that no one applied for, if that makes sense.
Were you asking Ashley that question?
Yeah. Ashley, do you have that info handy?
No, I do not. However, everybody that needed to reapply has reapplied. I believe, I want to say it's just 1 seat open, but we haven't had the discussion on who's the new applicants, what seat they're going to fill. So that's why I don't have an answer.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I believe that we still have a business seat open.
And public employee. Sorry, I forgot about that one. I think
we got an applicant. I believe we got an applicant for public employee. I believe, an AFSCME representative, if I'm not mistaken. So that may be a good fit. We'll see. I think, Ashley, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there is an open employee seat.
Correct. I'm looking at it now.
Because we had a former member, Joanne Hager, who was appointed by Councilmember Cunningham, and she's no longer.
Lucas Franco apply for that?
Oh.
I thought.
That could very well be. Maybe does that name ring a bell, or can we confirm anything about that, Ashley? Maybe take a minute to.
Sorry, can you repeat that, Brian?
Lucas Franco? Lucas?
Yes, we received the application from that person.
Oh, great. All right. Well, in that case, I think that we have a currently open business seat. But that's not in my mind, that's not bad to have all the rest of the seats filled and have one vacant, but can be filled on a rolling basis, I think, assuming that we were able to recruit an appropriate member for that seat. So just want to flag that for everyone, and also thank everyone for reapplying.
Is that designated as a large or small business?
Good question. I think it's actually business association.
Okay.
But I think it's fair to say there's some bit of flexibility in how we filled the seats. Certainly, I think it would have to be representing a business or business interest of some sort, or at least associated with some sort of business association. But we can double check all of that for you for sure. What else did I want to check or mention? I know that Veronica is on sabbatical, and I think Merle is planning on attending some of our meetings. I don't see him in the meeting today. There's been some back and forth about co-enforcement funding for 2022, and I hope that's resolved. But I guess I'll leave it to Merle or Veronica in a future meeting to kind of add some more info regarding that. So that's all of the updates that I have, I think. And Chelsea stepped away. So maybe, if nobody minds, is there any... Oh, there you are. I think that's all I have, Chelsea.
Yeah, and I think the co-enforcement, I think that's just also a product of the top of the call. 12 months and 3 new directors, all interim. It's been challenging. And then the next item on the agenda is general updates from other committee members. What's happening in your industry? What are you seeing in your world? What's happening for workers and employers? Does anyone have any updates?
So this is Brian Elliott. I just wanted to sort of flag for us to think about sort of once we get through all of the everything that's happening in the city right now between the elections and the budget cycle and all that, since our last meeting, New York City passed ordinances around delivery driver pay and rights, the app delivery drivers, things like you can't charge that the app companies can't charge drivers to get paid, which apparently is a thing, and they have to get paid at least once a week, and the apps are going to be required to provide drivers with more information about like how long a delivery might take and things like that, and drivers or the apps have to disclose how much of the tip is actually going to the drivers and things like that. So there's some interesting things to think about that is different than the ABC test, the California Independent Contractor ABC test that is currently in the courts. They sort of have taken a slightly different approach in New York City now, and might be something to look at as we are moving into after the budget cycle here.
Thanks, Brian. I also saw Wade. Wade?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Not about Unite Here or hospitality workers particularly, but I am serving on a panel in the city of Bloomington for an earned sick and safe time ordinance. The panel is kind of behind schedule. but hoping to get something in front of the council by the turn of the year. The biggest question mark has really been around, well, first of all, we're doing our best to skew a draft to the Minneapolis ordinance, but also adding a private right of action that the city of St. Paul has. But we are working very hard to kind of like create a regional policy, and there's real openness to that. The biggest question mark is around enforcement, because the city of Bloomington just does not have some of that infrastructure and tools around labor standards to start with. And so really kind of moving in a pretty deliberate way, if slow, to get the ordinance passed. I do have good news, though, is that the city attorney is looking to add an FTE to the department, which goes a long way. Just knowing that they're thinking about that, they're thinking about an enforcement infrastructure, which puts us in a position, I think, to ask to have a permanent labor standards table there, and all of those things. And so it is lining up well. Like I said, if just a bit slow, but I think it's really important to kind of build the plane as we're flying it, and but to do it right. So that's the quick update there.
I just wanted to make an update. I don't know how many other people here are part of it, but the advocates has been asked to be on a labor advisory council that the Hennepin County Attorney's Office is convening with the Ramsey County Attorney's Office and potentially the AG's office and a bunch of organized labor, and I'm not even sure who else, to look at effectively investigating and prosecuting wage theft and trafficking. That these cases have not gone anywhere really since there haven't been criminal, let me be clear there haven't been criminal prosecutions under the new wage theft law, even though it's been in effect for over a year. And I guess they want to see something done. So they're convening this labor advisory council. And honestly, it seems the selection of who is on it has been probably extremely political. I say that just because the call that I had with them was like 80% name dropping and 20% content. So I don't know how they chose who was going to sit on it, but if people, I'm happy to be a liaison, and like if they're discussing anything that I think is relevant to MWAC to bring it back and forth. And of course, anyone in their like private capacity wants to connect with me about it, happy to talk as well.
Madeline, sorry, I missed it. Who's convening this group?
Hennepin County Attorney's Office.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
With Ramsey?
Yep. Yeah. So as I understand it, like Mike Freeman wants a legacy of being pro-worker and wants to make sure that these cases are being taken seriously, and is frustrated that there doesn't seem to be a lead on investigating, and wants to figure out how to have better coordination between jurisdictions and between civil and criminal enforcement agencies.
That's wonderful news. Thank you.
Yeah.
Other updates from committee members? If I don't see any more, maybe we can hand it over to Eric. Eric, you've been waiting in the background, so.
In the background.
Eric Garcia Luna, you used to work for the city, right?
I did.
And now you're at the Federal Reserve. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And thanks for having me. I know I was looking at the list here, and I'm like, I'm sorry for the ones that have to hear this over and over again. So I know that there are some of you that have been close partners. I appreciate, Brian, you opening this space for me to showcase some of the work that we're doing at the Federal Reserve Bank. And yes, I was with Mayor Hodges for most of her term as mayor. then went to the University of Minnesota, and now I'm at the Federal Reserve Bank doing some regional economics work. And again, thank you for having me. So I'm going to share my screen if you don't mind, and just kind of go through a presentation real quick for those of you that may not be as familiar with the Federal Reserve. This might be a little helpful. And so let me just do that quick. And I don't know if you can see it now. I'm gonna say you can see it.
Yep, we can see it. Yep, we
Great.
can see it.
Great. At the Federal Reserve, before I go into details about the specific work, and again, more for those of you that may not be as familiar with the work with the Federal Reserve Bank, very quickly, you probably are familiar with the fact that the Federal Reserve is the central bank of the United States, but it is also a decentralized bank. And when it was designed, it was divided into 12 different regions. The Minneapolis Fed represents the 9th district and comprehends from left to right in that yellow part that you see in the map, the northern part. It comprehends the states of Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, the upper peninsula of Michigan, and the northwestern part of Wisconsin. There you go. So we have some monetary policy goals that the Federal Reserve, tries to foster for it to just, keep the economy going. Those policy goals are commonly referred to as the dual mandate, which is, given to us by Congress. One of them is to make sure that we keep prices stable, otherwise known as inflation, keeping an eye on inflation. And the next one is maximum sustainable employment, making sure that all of those that want to be employed and, that are out there looking for a job, that are able to work. So those two goals, again, they're referred to as the dual mandate. But to carry out those goals of pursuing those stable prices and maximizing sustainable employment, the Minneapolis Fed, there's a team of regional economists, regional outreach directors here at the Fed, which I'm part of. We execute outreach across the 9th district to get as much real-time information as possible. And again, thanks to those that have already been part of that information gathering since the time I've been here. Traditionally, that process, has heavily relied on 9 district firms and industry contacts that provide insights on current economic activity, including labor market conditions. And while that's very valuable and it helps us understand the economy, it only gives us one side of the story. In recent months, the Minneapolis Fed, we have kind of, taken a different approach, a much broader approach. And, we've added 2 additional lenses. One of them, we keep track of minority and women-owned business enterprises through partnerships on that front, and the workers' experiences, which is where this conversation fits. We are trying to better understand what is happening with workers from the perspective of those workers or labor representatives, nonprofit organizations that interact directly with workers from other cultures, and so on. Chelsea, Wade, and Chelsea in this call, we're part of this recent effort that we did to try to, just get a better sense of what is happening with low-wage frontline workers in the Minneapolis economy, for example. We carried out a pilot survey for which we got 121 respondents in janitorial and hospitality occupations. The survey was made available in English, Spanish, and Somali, and was open for roughly a month from the end of July until about the beginning of September. So I'm not going to dive into too much detail about the findings, but I just kind of wanted to showcase some of the, big topics that we some of the things that we learned and some of the conclusions that we drew from those findings. The biggest takeaways that we found were employed workers can also be job seekers. There's this idea that job seekers may be unemployed or underemployed, but as you probably are more familiar than I am, employed workers that may be working not just one but two jobs or more, they're also, moving around throughout the economy. Workers want training and skills to advance in the job market, but they often struggle to invest in themselves amid the challenges of daily life. And they're worried about meeting basic needs like housing, bills, and staying healthy. Again, I know I'm preaching to the choir in this meeting, but just wanted to show some of these statistics that we found. So who are these workers we heard from? Self-explanatory on that pie chart. The ethnicity of respondents is probably reflective of what you're used to seeing in some of these jobs. 37% Hispanic, 35% white, and 20% black or African American. Well, one thing that I just like to say, I like to point out, and again, this shows that people of color are overrepresented in this industry, and in consequence, any economic shock that may affect this industry, like we've seen in the last few months, is going to disproportionately affect those communities. Levels of education, we were interested in seeing, who are these workers in terms of education. You often hear the association between low wage and low education and low skill work. That's the way you usually hear this. Level of educations, in this case, those who responded to this survey, low income does not necessarily equate to low education or low skill. Those yellow lines here show that 55% of respondents in low wage jobs, excuse me, have at least some college credits. Looking at it closer, 10% have associate degrees, 13% bachelor's degrees to be precise. And if we add that first green bar, we have that 86% have at least a high school diploma. We wanted to also see, what the breakdown of those income distributions are for each of these respondents. 50% said they were the sole income provider, and the rest, either they had their spouse, their child, or their parent, or a mix of all of those contribute to household income. Then, mimicking a question from the Census Household Pulse Survey, we asked those workers what income sources their families, their household relied on to meet their spending needs during the pandemic, represented in yellow, and before the pandemic in yellow, during the pandemic in the last 12 months in blue. Most respondents say that they use regular income from work. Now, remember, these are union represented, so that you probably don't see that big of a change in those that said they use regular income from work. Stimulus, obviously, there was no stimulus before the pandemic. And reliance on unemployment insurance, not surprisingly, went up 5 times during this time, going from roughly 7% to 40%. But what's surprising here to some is that, some of these responses also show increases in credit card use, for example, and the number of workers that dipped into their savings or borrowed money from family and friends definitely went up significantly, just kind of showing how complex finances can be for these individuals. More than half of respondents said they had no savings. From those who said they do not have savings, approximately 60% said they did not make enough to save, and 30% said they exhausted their savings during the pandemic. Oh, sorry about that. From those that have some savings, the majority only have about enough to cover, 1 month worth of expenses. We wanted to explore that market mobility that I talked about at the beginning. Again, job seekers, are not just unemployed or underemployed. And we wanted to just dive into that a little more. We asked workers what occupational changes they were trying to make. This question, it allowed for multiple responses to be selected. And at the top in green, we see that 58% of respondents want a job with better pay. 47% would like better benefits. Very close third, that darker blue line, they want more flexibility, either in their current jobs or in jobs that they are seeking. This may be perhaps because, as you and I know, workers are finding it even more challenging today to balance work and family responsibilities. And 40% right here in blue, light blue, said that they want a job in a different field. Just more to kind of put some context into those changes. The changes that they're trying to make, they're not new for many. While yes, there was a spike on, people looking for these changes in the last 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months, you see those two yellow lines, those two yellow bars that just show that people have been looking for better opportunities or other opportunities for at least a year and a half before this survey was taken. Not surprising either, those changes people want to make aren't always easy to reach. Only 7% said they find it easy, and 65% express some level of difficulty. And just more details on that front. What are some of those challenges respondents are facing as they move through the labor market? Some aspects are specific to the industries they work in, or that they want to work in. Those highlighted here in yellow, either, the jobs I found do not pay enough, the jobs I found do not offer benefits like health insurance, the job schedules are difficult to keep, the jobs I found are too far. 55% said that wages, their offer aren't high enough, for example. Other aspects have to do with workers' ability to maintain a healthy work-life balance. And some self-investment challenges. Respondents recognize that as the economy evolves, they need to keep up with their skills and knowledge. But 51% said they need more computer knowledge, for example, and 30% said they need a computer and internet access. This is perhaps a recognition to the increase in automation that some of you have seen, and the need for more flexibility, again, to balance their work-life responsibilities better. And yet, while many are willing to work to obtain new skills, 57% say they either do not have the time or know how to go about getting trained. And so lastly, what are frontline workers concerned with? They are concerned with a broad range of life situations, but more than half is worried about their ability to meet those basic needs that we also talked about at the beginning. 73% are worried about paying their monthly bills, 69% about healthcare, 66% paying for housing, 49% securing food for themselves and their families. COVID exposure continues to be a concern for about 35% of individuals. Not a big surprise, since a lot of these janitorial and hospitality workers have been or are constantly exposed to that. And with that, I just want to make a couple of wrap-up points. One of the things that we do with this information that we gather is we write our national reporting along with the other 11 banks that are part of the system, commonly known as the Beige Book. We recently added 2 new sections to that Beige Book that go, that are associated with those 2 initiatives that I mentioned at the beginning, the Minority and Women Business Enterprise Initiative and the Worker Experience part of our work. And so starting in March, I believe, March of this year, we began reporting on those 2 items. We are the only bank, the only Federal Reserve Bank that reports on those 2 items. And again, thanks to all of those that have already been part of that. Another thing that we do with the information that we collect, whether it's through surveys or through having conversations with you, we inform internally our decision makers so that they can base their monetary policy decisions on a more holistic picture of the economy. And some of you may be familiar with all the things that we put out there from the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, whether it's articles, research, and webinars and all of that. So that's what we do with that information. And so I'm here to more than ask, hope that, I can continue to be in touch with all of you. I'll end this slideshow very quickly here to make sure that we have a little bit of interactive time. But, we're always looking for new additional partners to expand input from across the 9th district. And that's why I'm here, hoping that you could be added to our list of partners so that we can continue to build upon this work, again, so that we can have regular and better consultation to better describe the district's economy and through our surveys. And I don't think I need to leave this on for too long, so I'm just going to end this. And if I can find my button, I will go ahead and do that. There you go. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, Eric. It was so nice to see that. I would love to open it up to have other folks ask questions of this. But before we do that, I just want to say this is, like you mentioned, is one of the first Federal Reserve banks that is going deep with workers and the worker experience. And we really appreciate you spearheading that. So
thank you.
So I'll open it up to other folks. Questions, comments?
Eric, thanks so much for being here. I'm curious if you could just comment kind of to Chelsea's point. How does this fit in the really big picture? How is this different from the approach that the Fed has taken historically, and sort of where do you see the significance in a big picture kind of way?
Yeah, the biggest difference is, I guess, in that one of those first slides that I showed, right? Traditionally, we have gathered information from industry leaders, from businesses on what does the job market look like, right? And it basically translates into, unemployment numbers, which, we know that they're not always a reflective number of what's happening in the economy. Now, that information is valuable. Nobody's going to dispute that. We need to know that information. But again, as I mentioned, when one of our mandates is maximizing employment, and we are only getting a partial picture of what the labor market looks like from employers, and not necessarily taking into account what may be happening in the world of the diversity that is the workforce, that is supplying that is the supply side of the labor market. That's I guess the biggest difference, right? Before we only heard from the demand side. We're trying to get a better sense of what's happening in the supply side, so that this information, these monetary policy decisions, these reports that we do, and policy decisions that others make, utilizing the information that we put out there, it's actually considering the entire gamma of what the labor market is. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Right.
That helps a lot. And I just think the kind of the public discourse that we have, amongst colleagues and friends and neighbors, and that you see in the media and whatnot, is just really informed by the leadership of an institution as important as the Federal Reserve Bank. So your work and sort of that theme of taking into account the supply side of the labor market is really powerful. So thank you.
It is, and we're thankful that, I guess, as far as leadership goes, and I know Chelsea, Wade, and others here have been part of those conversations with Neil Kashkari, and there is truly a commitment to bring in those those other voices that haven't been at the table in the past.
Other questions or topics for Eric?
Hey, I'm Merle Payne. I'm with Sleep Tool. And sorry, I got pulled away a couple of times. I may have missed this. I heard the old ways of collecting information was trying to collect information about what does the job market look like. And you probably named this, but I may have missed it. What are the core goals of collecting this information? Like, what are you trying to accomplish with collecting this information?
Yeah, I think this also ties back to that question that Brian had, right? We are our two mandates are keep an eye on inflation, maximize employment, right? Those are the two basic mandates that the Federal Reserve System has. In terms of the second one, as I was mentioning, we have only taken into account the decisions that we make have been based heavily on the demand side of that world. The objective, I guess, is to have a more informed picture of what the labor market is, but at the same time, how we report that and how we talk about the economy makes a tremendous difference for others that pay attention to what the Federal Reserve Bank does. One of them, the Beige Book. The other one is, the many publications and research that we do. And so by having this additional lens looking at our work, it is our hope that, those decisions and that information that is put out there to make other decisions can be more complete. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. So I have kids in the background.
Oh, I get it.
I'm getting a little bit distracted, but just one thing from looking at the data that you collected, one key conclusion that I see from that is that employers are not paying fair wages. They're not paying what workers deserve to be paid. And I didn't see that as a conclusion of what this research was. I'm wondering about, I really appreciate the idea that this is bringing in the depth of like actual frontline workers and the experience into an analysis of what's happening in the economy. But it felt very centered on the workers and the workers being the problem, rather than looking from the top down and the employers and the role that employers could play in changing things.
Yeah, and that is our goal, right? And that's what I mean by looking at this work from the supply side of the workforce, right? Like centering the worker around this additional lens has been at the core of the development of these work. Hey, Wade, good to see you again.
Yeah, Wade here, and I have seen the presentation a couple times, and Eric and I have talked extensively, but I just think that information like this becomes even more rich and more important when you see what the jobs numbers looked like last week, that we only added 180,000 jobs while 4 million people left the job force, and the impact on women and people of color. I just really believe that while this was a pilot and a small group, it just really kind of demonstrates how volatile that market is right now, and how people really are looking for something different, and maybe better, maybe more flexible, or something that just really addresses each of their needs. So I think that now more than ever, this is really good information to be collecting.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, and I think I shared this with you when I ran into you the other day, Wade, that Care 11 actually did a story on the jobs numbers, and they utilized some of these data at the end. So, despite the fact, and I made that clear when I made the official presentation, this is not statistically significant, but it should not be dismissed because of that, right? It certainly paints a picture of what these workers are going through, and while it's not a sizable sample and statistically significant by any means, it definitely puts numbers behind those anecdotes that you witness, or those situations that you witness day by day, and those anecdotes that we get to hear. So I think that that's the value of it, and the reason why I'm here, because I want to make sure that this continues to grow, and I would love to hear from as many of you as you would like to participate on these. Just a brief. I just want to briefly say that there's no survey that is just set in stone, right? If there are things that you're concerned with in the survey, we worked together with Chelsea, with Wade, with Greg from SEIU, in trying to figure out what is it that we need to ask. This is a collective effort, and we definitely are here to work with you, and hope to increase these partnerships.
Hi, this is Elise from Target. Do you, you said you were the only bank across doing this right now. Have you presented this to the other banks, and is there interest to sort of pick this up in other regional areas as well?
Yeah, the conversation, I believe it's starting, and let me just clarify that we are the only bank that reports on this in the Beige Book, which is, the Beige Book, if you're familiar, those that follow the Federal Reserve Bank know what the Beige Book is and wait for it to come out every 6 weeks or so, 8 times a year. So it is one of the most visible reports that the Federal Reserve System puts out there. And yes, so far Minneapolis is the only bank that reports on that. And yes, there is interest. Like anything, it may take time. But again, thanks to Neil Kashkari that started putting this at the center of what we should be focusing on. It seems to be moving a little bit. And with that, I don't want to take more time than people want. It's almost 5.
I usually have a lot to say, but I'm actually feeling a little like flabbergasted that we're like leading on this. So
this is great.
I think it has a lot to do with your work, Eric, and
thank you,
and Wade, and everybody making sure that these stories are front and center.
That's right, and it's much appreciated. This wouldn't have been possible without your partnership. And again, if you don't mind, Brian, please rotate my information with the group, and I would love to, if you want to have a one-on-one conversation about this work, I welcome that. The other thing that I will probably just plant, I mentioned the regular consultation to better describe the district's economy, as Chelsea and Wade know. I randomly would be like, what is happening? What are some of the most pressing issues? That it could also be that informal, right? Like I'm always looking for information, for patterns, for things that you may be hearing. You have your ears to the ground, and I definitely would love to tap into that to make sure that we're doing a good job at reflecting workers in everything that we do.
Well, we appreciate you being here. Are you hanging around till the end, or are you hopping off?
I am hopping off because I have to let my puppy out, but I appreciate I appreciate the time, and thank you for Brian for having me, and Chelsea, we'll see you around.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
This was just the start. Thank you.
Thanks.
So Brian Walsh, could I put you on the spot for a moment?
Of course.
Do you know what the status, so this project that we just talked to Eric about with the Federal Reserve is very specific to worker experiences. Do we know what the status is of the Federal Reserve's assessment of the minimum wage?
Ooh, yes. Actually, the Federal Reserve is going to report a, so they have a once yearly report.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Just for folks who are new, once the minimum wage policy was passed, it was a clear direction that we needed to have a review and research phase of the minimum wage. And the Federal Reserve is the entity that received that bid or that project.
Yeah,
and so now, like this, what we just talked to Eric about was totally separate. That doesn't have anything to do, but it does bring up the Federal Reserve as an issue. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, the Federal Reserve, there's a couple of researchers in particular at the Federal Reserve who agreed to study the effect of the Minneapolis minimum wage increase, the Minneapolis minimum wage ordinance. It's a 5-year long study, I believe, and it's really comprehensive, in especially because of the data that it includes. I think it was data from deed, but then also data from, maybe it was revenue, Minnesota Department of Revenue. There's something about the data that they got that they believe makes it a rich and unique study. The first few that they have a once yearly report to the Minneapolis City Council. The first couple were basically baseline studies and sort of reporting back that they were still trying to get access to the data. But there is an update. My understanding is that they are set to report the very first really substantive analysis of what the effects have been. And I believe they're going to do that in either November or December in a presentation to the City Council. So as soon as I know more, I will certainly flag that for this group, because that will be a very noteworthy event.
yes, please keep us apprised. So I'm just looking at the agenda here. We did Federal Reserve. Now we're on to the essential worker pay.
So, hey, this is Brian Elliott. We earlier on the agenda, Merle, you weren't on yet. We talked. You referenced Brian Walsh. You referenced the co-enforcement funding, and you said that Merle may have an update, and I'm wondering if that is the case.
Yes. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. I apologize for being a little bit late. I got caught in another meeting. But yes, so the mayor put out the initial proposed budget, and it included, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was about a 70% decrease in funding around co-enforcement, which was pretty shocking to see. So we immediately reached out to the mayor's office to understand what was happening. Based on what we are hearing, it sounded like it was not, that it was more of a communication, clerical, administrative mistake and not an intent to take away the funding. But the latest we've heard from the mayor's office was the budget markup begins on December 3rd. And we will know something prior to that, which sounds to us, that is a little bit alarming, that we because if we have to wait all the way till December 3rd to know where things are at, it is probably too late to influence. It is becoming later and later. Our hope was that the mayor would see that there was a mistake and they would correct it and send an amended budget. And we are not hearing indications that the mayor is thinking about that.
Thanks, Merle. That from my perspective, that's really helpful to know, and I don't have any additional information on my end of things.
All right. So if there's no other questions for Merle, I can dive into the update on the frontline worker pay. It's not long, unfortunately, and that is that the Senate is definitely stalling. The best assessment is that they've not figured out how to have a special session without firing Jan Malcolm within the Senate GOP, and so it doesn't really matter if there's a deal or not. If they're not willing to take firing Jan Malcolm off the table. So, it's all tied together, right? We're talking about recognizing workers for their sacrifices during the pandemic, and the Senate GOP is saying that we can't do that unless they're allowed to fire the House commissioner in the middle of another, in the middle of a surge. So right now, they actually sent an offer to the governor saying, not only do we want to be able to fire Jan Malcolm, we're not going to agree to take that off the table, but we also think that you need to put on the table rewriting the emergency powers statutes. There's going to be a meeting on Wednesday this week of the Frontline Worker Pay Working Group. The two sides really have, the Democrats and the administration put forward an offer before Labor Day. The Republicans responded with a press conference several weeks later, I think 3 or 3.5 weeks later. A month after Labor Day, the Democrats and the administration clarified, added more detail to their offer. The difference is basically the Republicans are proposing to give the universe of under 200,000 workers a $1,200 bonus, and those workers are exclusively hospitals, nursing homes, police, fire, and corrections. And home care, nursing home care, hospital, police, fire, corrections. And the coalition of workers is proposing, saying that $250 million simply is not enough to recognize the sacrifices that these workers made. But of the $250 million, we should be including 667,000 workers in a range of industries that are basically described by workers who were considered essential during the pandemic, who had to work in person around other people, whether those were customers, clients, patients, etc. And basically, if you met those requirements, you should be recognized from this initial $250 million, and that we should dedicate more money to do more for this universe later. So that's kind of where we are. Is the Republicans want to give more money to a much smaller universe, and the workers whose interests are being pretty accurately represented by the Democrats on the working group and the administration are saying, no, what we are hearing from workers, what we have been hearing from workers, is that all of these workers face risk. The risk was not about whether or not you were dealing with a COVID positive patient. The risk was whether or not you were working in person around other people because you could not work from home. And we need to recognize all of these workers. And so that's kind of where we're at. But at the moment, even if we got agreement tomorrow, a potential application deadline wouldn't even be able to happen before, the new year. So that's kind of where we're at.
Any questions for Brian Elliott on that? Or updates or? Well, thank you, Brian, for always delivering the update on the essential worker pay. We appreciate it.
I wish it were better.
Item on the agenda is about the COVID vaccine and testing mandates. I know we're not necessarily like proposing anything today, but I would love to hear from folks about implementation. How is COVID testing? How is vaccination mandates? Like, how is that playing out in your workplaces, either as employers or as employees?
Well, Chelsea,
I'll hop in.
no, you go
Just
ahead,
I gotta
please.
say, this is Elise from Target. We obviously, like all of you, are very closely watching Biden OSHA ETS and when that will actually come out. Supposedly, presumptually, you know, if it was supposed to maybe come out last week, but maybe for sure, based on the timelines, around October 27th, if not before, if they don't pass it through more, if they decide to pass it sooner. And, you know, in Minnesota, because we run our own OSHA program, we'll have 30 days here to essentially write the rule and adopt it here in Minnesota, either the same standard or higher, if we so choose. So for us as a company, obviously impacted across the country, looking at all sorts of tools in terms of collecting. What does it look like to collect attestation or vaccine cards? You know, the technology needed for 400,000 team members across the country. And also just trying to understand with hybrid work, making sure we understand what we're going to implement and what that actually, you know, we've gone through different scenario planning of what will be involved for the HQ workers, in addition to the stores and distribution centers. So we're basically running a lot of scenarios just to try to understand, you know, without, as you know, this process doesn't really have any input. You just sort of get, you know, try to gather rumors and send information, but it's truly not a public process like other rules. And so we are just trying to anticipate what we can expect to see and then working through implementation, you know, within the next month or two here. So not much more to say other than running scenarios daily and multiple teams running on this. And this is for retail, this is our busiest time. We have the most team members working right now. And so just trying to understand to what you said, Chelsea, you know, between the mandate, percentage vaccinated, and or also testing, real concerns about testing and availability to get not only to get the actual tests, to understand, you know, what that actually looks like for an employee to get that test, you know, and how much time does it take and how much time does it take to get back. We'll also say that we are, and it's not Minnesota, so I may not have to bring it up here, but we are watching the states that are passing laws and going into special session, particularly in the South, that are putting some other sort of exemptions and barriers up to the mandate as well, and what that would look like for the employee experience for that. So lots to watch in the next couple weeks and months here.
I really appreciated that update. I think you just articulated what's going through everyone's head in a very succinct way. So other updates on vaccines and testing mandates, lack of how are folks approaching them in the workplaces and as employers? Man, for the top issue, you guys don't even have much to say.
I'm taking the approach we take it. We're doing everything in phases and moving really slow, and we're calling it being extremely thoughtful. Basically, we're waiting to see exactly what pans out. And quite frankly, with the city of Minneapolis and the park board, nobody wants to say it out loud, but we're also waiting to see how the election plays into the idea of what's going to happen next with vaccines and vaccine policies and testing. So I will tell you, yes, we're being very thoughtful, Chelsea, very, very thoughtful. And we're trying to make sure that we build good infrastructure and process before we just rush into doing something. Because the other thing is, which no one is talking about, is testing is expensive. And you have to do, I mean, target, I believe for you with your 400,000 people, because we have a much smaller number, but still, we still have 47 rec centers and we have employees at 47 sites. And so just that's a logistical nightmare in and of itself. And, we were talking today, it's things that you have to stop and consider. So for instance, depending, somebody was saying, what type of test is it? Because some of the employees who are celebrating Ramadan, they don't necessarily want anything invasive in their body. So they don't necessarily want to have a specific kind of test because, again, that might be difficult for them. So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to put into place before we really decree a process and a specific line of testing.
Yeah, I would agree, May. And I mean, there's just a huge concern about literally having enough tests around in addition to what people need right now. You got school kids going in, you got college kids going in, people are just all of the need now and some of the backup in the lab. So I agree with you. There's multiple levels to the testing piece of it. And then also you brought up a great point. Also, even from a religious or medical exemption, being able to capture that and what does that look like? And just sort of understanding again from and we have a stores in DC perspective, so a little bit different, but sort of how would that HR leader make sure that they're tracking all of that and understanding that and provide, and for the employee to also have a good experience through all of this is really important. So it's just without knowing much and having some good guesses at parameters of what's coming down, I think everybody, the good news is everybody's over 100 employees is in the same boat. So we all are trying to figure it out and going through the guidelines that we have. But I think it's a good idea, May, to your point, to be thoughtful and sort of really truly understand before implementing, just to make sure it's what everybody needs in this process from the employers and the employees.
Any other updates on vaccines and vaccine and testing mandates? I think that should be a standing agenda item for the next couple months. With that, I will turn it over to Brian or any other committee members for announcements.
Chelsea, I'm sorry again for being late. What I wanted to ask around the co-enforcement funding, I know that the Civil Rights Department, a part of what the mayor's office said was that the information about the budget didn't come from the Civil Rights Department, and I know there was follow-up that the Civil Rights Department did send what the request was for funding, and we're not seeing them act on it yet. I'm wondering if there could be a formal communication from the Workplace Advisory Committee saying that I know that there is a formal request for the $800,000 and 8 staff, but now that this has been cut back by 70% and we haven't seen the movement yet, could there be a formal written request from the Workplace Advisory Committee naming this as a priority to reinsert that in the budget?
I think so. Could we take that up in, because November will still be before the December meeting. Could we take that up in November? Does that work?
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
But yeah, I mean, we could before November, we could reiterate the request formally.
Yeah.
Brian Walsh, do you think it would make sense to just resend our letter to the mayor's office?
Yeah, I'm trying to, I have to look again. What was the most recent? Oh yeah, we just did the
800,000 that we always request.
right, and we did the communication this year or this summer in the form of the workplace, the downtown worker council recommendations. We could certainly resend that communication if you all want to. With that,
I think any bump right now would be helpful, and then we can revisit in November to see where things are at and if there's a need for more of a bump than that. But I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm okay with resending the. What other folks think? Resend the same letter? I'm not seeing any nays. Yeah, why don't we send the same letter? Because it's the one that, we always send. We update it and tweak it every year. So why don't we send that letter again as a reminder? And then revisit in November if we need to do a more direct communication about the co-enforcement.
That sounds great. Thank you.
I will absolutely do that. And I will let, and I will be sure to let you all know when that communication has been sent to the mayor's office, and we'll also put this item back on the agenda for next month's meeting.
Sounds good. All right, seeing no other hands, I think we can adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.